Good day, people. Hope everyone is well. I thought I'd jump on the tubes a little bit here. It's the end of the summer. I thought I'd maybe say some things about this relationship between psychology and ontology. It's sort of like a footnote on the relationship between Husserl and Heidegger. And maybe, I'm not sure what I'm going to title this video. It might be titled something like How Big is the Now? So I'm interested in this question of how large is the now as it's experienced. Is it a short little razor slice? Is it this knife blade that cuts between past and future? Or is it a saddle-bagged, elongated stretch, something that retainingly awaits as it unfolds? I guess that's part of what I want to get at. But I want to start with something like take a melody. Okay, now when I listen to a melody and the melody is heard as a whole, it's odd because although I experience the whole of the melody, what is empirically available to the ears is generally just a couple of notes at a time. So the notes are unfolding over time and there's a succession of them. I can only hear a couple of them at a moment. And yet, or the empirical auditory field is sort of naturally evanescent, so that the sounds disappear to make room for the following ones almost as quickly as they have appeared. And there's this natural vanishing evanescence, right, of the notes. But they don't simply disappear. You could say they're retained. They're anticipated. I have memory, I have imagination, and the memory and imagination, they seem to be giving an experience, again, of a whole of the melody, even though in some hyper-atomistic empiricism, you really only just get one note or a couple of notes at a time that, again, just as quickly vanish. Now, again, at first pass, and this is, I think, sort of the Husserl move. At first pass, you do this, what is the nature of memory? What is the nature of imagination? How are retentions and protensions part of conscious experience? That is, how is conscious experience a temporal stream that, as William James says, it's saddlebagged by past and by future. It's not a specious present, this little fragment of now. It isn't anything like that. And so for Husserl, it's as if the main insight is that there's a kind of a presentation, right? He calls it an a presentation. That is, the notes that aren't directly experienced are sort of a presented through longitudinal intentionalities, these temporally bound, the structures that are undergirding the experience of the whole of the melody, right? It's very similar to as I'm speaking right now. You can only hear a couple of words, maybe a word at a time, maybe a couple at a time, but as an utterance is unfolding, you're able to retain some of the earlier words, and that's how the sentence as a whole makes sense. I mean, you can't hear all of the words of a given sentence at a simultaneous moment, but it's as if the moment of now is an elongated stretch that makes room for more than just itself. It carries along what was and anticipates what will be. Now, again, all this, it strikes to what I think for a lot of people, they say, this is, it's the eidetic economy, it's the psychological resources that the individual has. I mean, a person might say, this was what had survival value in various ways. And I think all that's true. But I think you get to this Heidegger move, this sort of Heideggerian moment, when you start to ask, but if we go to the melody, it's not as if my memory is just representing the melody. It's what we call memory, what we call imagination, is an ontological feature of the world that it has allowed the present to be more than a just rapidly fleeting moment. It's an expanse in which people they dwell, they tarry along, right? And to call it simply psychology is to really miss, I guess, this like evolutionary biology point that nature is such that the past, there's, how do I say it? There's a certain kind of past that we can imagine just is what it is, but then there are all kinds of pasts which can only be what they are given memory and imagination. But that doesn't mean they're subjective. It doesn't mean like, oh yeah, people are just making them up. No, memory and imagination are part of the fabric of the universe that has made possible certain kinds of pasts. That is, those kinds of pasts that make the experience of the whole of a melody, right? And I think the more that one starts to ask, how can one, I guess, reposition psychological phenomena like memory, like imagination, in terms of their ontological status. That is, there's something that emerged in nature. They're as natural as the notes that could be heard. Now, they're not part of the outer world in the sense of they're not just the melody being played in some atomistic flow of fleeting sounds, but they're not inner subjective representations. See, if you say it's a representation, well, what's it representing? There wasn't a whole there. Now, we could say there were patterns. Now, patterns, again, it gets very difficult to say where the pattern is. I mean, what are the particular boundaries of the sounds? Are they located, in space in a certain way? We could try to get to some of that in a very scientific way, but it's going to introduce this temporal framing of where and when does the present slip into the past, when does the future break into the present. This interesting question of, what is it that's exactly separating the past and the present and the future in an unfolding over time. I think, though, the more that people could focus on that very simple case of a melody, and even though you can only hear a couple notes, you hear the whole of it. The whole is experienced because of these capacities of the human, but those capacities are already part of the fabric of nature. So it's as if we're a vehicle or a mediating gateway through which nature has folded back on itself. And it's like a fold or a wrinkle in time that elongates the passage of time. I remember when I was a young person, I remember believing that if everything were in change and change were omnipresent, then the change would be imperceptible. I mean, the argument was basically that there has to be something that isn't changing, some sort of unchanged, in order to register the change. And for the longest time, that kind of made sense to me. And then, as I got older, I realized that's just way too simple. All you really need is differing rates of change, and as differing rates of change intersect, the intersecting different rates of change, that produces objects. It produces the space, the overlapping interstices where you can perceive the change. That is, there seems to be something unchanged or unchanging where different rates of change overlap and intersect. At any rate, hope everyone is well, and hope people are enjoying their Heidegger and their Husserl these days. Okay.